What up, good people? Y'all see the title of the video, so there's no secret today about what this video is going to be about. I do find it interesting that out of all the Spider-Man and Spider-Woman characters and variants, that this is the Spider-Man that MGM and Amazon decided to select, but I'm actually glad they did because his backstory and character is one of the cooler ones for the Spider people, and I think this live action movie with Nicolaus Cage playing this version of Peter Parker can do amazing on the big screen, if of course done correctly. So today, I want to give his origin story according to Marvel Comics, and I'm going to talk about what I believe they should bring in from the comics to make this movie worthwhile for us, the paying fans, to actually want to watch. First, though, let's start with his origin story, and then I'll give my thoughts, of course, on the upcoming rumored, actually, I think it's been confirmed now, not rumored, movie after that. This version of Peter Parker, though, first appeared in Spider-Man Noir, #1, that came out in December of 2008 and was written by David Hine and butchering of name incoming Fabrice Sablowski. If I butchered your name, I apologize. But coming out of 2007, though, Marvel Comics had been in a little bit of a decline with its sales, but towards the end of that year, it started to actually see a little bit of an uptick with storylines, coming out like the Ultimates, for example. Marvel also felt like this was the time to introduce new things, into the Marvel comic book, storyline. So with that, enter the noir verse. This universe is largely based, on the idea of a universe built off of a pulp fiction style theme, world in its storytelling and writing, just to give a little background on how the noir verse came to be. But back to the topic at hand though. Yes, this version of Peter was bitten by a radioactive spider. Yes, his Uncle Ben gets killed by a criminal, just like the other Peters we've seen. However, the way it happened and what happened afterwards is a little different than what we have seen out of the other Peter Parker's Spider-Mans that we've seen down through the years. Now, as most of you might know, this Peter Parker story is based back in the 1920s, early 30s, I would say, during the time of the Great Depression. Peter's aunt and uncle were activists against, shady business individuals who were taking advantage of people. And because of this, this is actually what caused Uncle Ben to get killed by one of those underhanded businessman's henchmen who worked for the lead bad guy at the time named the Goblin. This Peter also works for the Daily Bugle, just like the original Peters that we've seen. And while working there, he was actually taken under the tutelage by a man named Ben Urich. Even after his Uncle Ben's death, while working at the Bugle, Peter, alongside his aunt May, they continued, in an activism work and wanted to, get ahead of and really find out about these different business people who were doing this shady work, and in some ways try to find out the person who killed his uncle. Now, one day Peter received a tip about the Goblin and his network doing a job, and this was actually meant for Uric. And Peter, though, got the tip and decided to go check it out. What the Goblin and his men were stealing were antiques, though, and it just so happened that one of these was a spider idol or totem of sorts. And doing this heist, it broke open, releasing a ton of spiders, and one of these found its way to Peter and bit him. After being bit, Peter kind of loses consciousness, has some weird dream about, the spider god, and upon him waking up, well, he has spider powers. With his newfound spider powers, he continued with his investigative journalist intuition, and Spider-Man Noir is born. The best part of this story, in my opinion, though, is what he did once he came across his uncle's killer, the villain also known as the Vulture. We've seen him in Tom Holland's first Spider-Man movie. Anyway, in most of the Spider People story that we have seen, when they end up coming across the person that killed their Uncle Ben, that person normally ends up dying. However, it's normally due to some unfortunate situation, even though Peter, happens to be involved. This version of Peter, though, actually kills this person with his own hands instead. And though he did it, to kind of save his Aunt May from being killed by this person, it was still done darker than, most of the Spider-Men and women that we've seen because really, they normally don't kill the guy with their bare hands, the guy or whatnot, he just ends up dying. Of course, he doesn't continue on down, this dark path of just killing bad guys due to some, as I like to say, and anime people who watch Naruto know this, that talk no jutsu. And this actually came from his Aunt May. And after this, he continues on, being the typical Spider-Man we have seen them all be. His suit, his design of his suit, by the way, is based on a World War I airman's uniform, who in the comics actually was inspired by his uncle Ben, who actually served in the army as a airman. As far as spider people go, his powers are, pretty standard to all of the others we have seen, minus, Miles Morales, who has, the standard person of color, electrical powers and stuff like that. But otherwise, powers are pretty standard Spider-Man powers. The one thing that this Peter has that others don't, though, is I believe this immunity to pain, which I find interesting. And I'm curious if they're actually going to, one, decide to bring that into the movie and how that's actually going to look and play it out on the big screen, as he's, taking damage and stuff like that. Much like, though, Gwen Stacy, Spider-Woman, who I have talked about, on this channel in a previous video. In Marvel Comics, after his first comic book series that ended in 2009, his Spider-Man was mostly involved in team-ups and multiversal stories like, the Web Warrior series, mostly. And it wasn't really until 2020 when he was given another individual comic, which I believe was Spider-Man #1, written by Margaret Stowe. Man, Marvel really put some thought into these names of their comic book titles, down through the years, especially this one. But anyway, in this story, though, Marvel took Spider-Man Noir's character kind of back to his roots of being a crime-fighting neighborhood Spider-Man with some investigative skills, which saw him follow a murder all the way across the pond. As far as the live action movie goes and how I believe, MGM and Amazon, goes about making this, I can see this done really in one of two ways. If they have in mind the idea, of making more than just one of these movies, depending on how it performs on box office, obviously, they could go the route of bringing his origin story to live action and the Spider-Man Noir #1. This one, though, done back in 2008, I think would do nicely here. I know in my video about Spider-Gwen that I referenced, in that movie, I actually said that if they make that movie a potential origin story style movie, wouldn't really work, or they wouldn't have to do that basically because we got her origin story essentially in both of the Spider-Verse films. But with this version of Peter Parker, it wouldn't actually feel overdone since we've seen, Spider-Man origin stories done before, but his Spider-Man is so unique, I think you can do it and pull it off. If they don't want to do that and they don't see it going multiple movies and they want to only make this kind of a one and done movie, then I believe the story they should use and the things they should use, they should pull it from the comic, the Spider-Man Noir #1 storyline that was done in 2020. And I would say they should start with issue #1, right? And then they could probably go all the way until issue #2, which saw him battling in this world, or in his world, well, I should say, version of Electro. I think, though, instead of using Electro, they could use another Spider-Man villain that hasn't been seen in any Spider-Man movie, and I believe they could use Rhino in this. I don't count the one that we saw at the end of Andrew Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man 2 because, well, no one counts that Rhino, or that version of Rhino anyway. But this theme of the way these comics are written, right, with that Pulp Fiction style theme, I think Rhino's character can actually fit in this style movie. And again, it would bring us another Spider-Man villain to the big screen. Like we talked about earlier, in this story, Peter, ended up following a murder across to London in these particular Spider-Man comics. The cool thing about this comic, though, is the kind of, at least in my opinion anyway, you can let me know in the comments if I'm, off base on this, but these comics kind of gave me a murder mystery feel in it, which I think would be interesting to see in a Spider Man movie and would give it another interesting element. It would be unique and it could make this movie stand out compared to the other Spider Man movies. Nick Cage, I believe, could pull off this type of role as well, but again, only if this movie is a one and done. I don't think you can do a murder mystery style movie and make it multiple. I know Adam Sandler did that with his movie on Netflix, but that's how I would do it. But let me know in the comments how you would do it, or if this Spider-Man movie is made in the ways that I mentioned, would you actually watch it? What would you do differently if not, what I talked about? You know what? That's all I actually have for today's video. But until the next video, I hope you all have a good one. Take care.